The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Wednesday that Israeli forces had surrounded the house of Yahya Sinwar. He said that they were potentially closing in on the top Hamas official in Gaza and the most wanted man by Israeli authorities. The Israel Defense Forces said that Sinwar was not in the house at the time and he was believed to be hiding underground in Gaza. But a senior advisor to the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that it was only a matter of time before we get him. Israel has publicly accused Yahya Sinwar of being the mastermind behind Hamas's terror attack against Israel, which happened on the 7th of October, in which more than 1,200 Israelis have died. This makes Sinwar one of the key targets of Israel's war in Gaza. A long-time figure in Hamas, Sinwar was responsible for building up Hamas's military wing before forging important ties with Arab powers like Egypt and, of course, with Iran. He was elected to Hamas's main decision-making body, what's called the Politburo, back in 2017. At that time, his title was the political leader of Hamas in Gaza. However, he has since become the Politburo's de facto leader. He's been designated a global terrorist by the US Department of State since 2015, and he's been recently sanctioned by both the UK and France. Experts warn against looking at Sinwar as some kind of a sole leader of Hamas. He's perceived as the most senior one because he has a very high public profile. But Hamas does not necessarily work that way. Hamas is a decentralized organization. It's got several separate power centers, and Sinwar happens to be one of them. He's believed to be one of a triumvirate of Hamas leaders who were responsible for the October 7th attack. Along with Sinwar, there's also Muhammad al-Mazri, popularly known as Muhammad Daif, the commander of the Al-Qasem Brigades, which is the military wing of Hamas. There is also Daif's deputy, Marwan Isa. Sinwar, with his silver hair and dark eyes, is by far the best known and most recognizable of these three. But it was Daif who announced the October 7th attacks to the whole wide world. While Sinwar has spent the past few years giving speeches and being photographed, Daif, on the other hand, is an extremely secretive, almost shadowy figure who's not been seen in public. Sinwar was born in 1962 in a refugee camp in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. His family was displaced from Al-Majdal, a Palestinian village which is in modern-day Ashkelon. This happened during the Arab-Israeli War in the late 1960s. He then joined Hamas in the late 1980s. He became one of the founders of its very feared internal intelligence apparatus known as the Majd. He was convicted in 1988 of playing a role in the murder of 2 Israeli soldiers and 4 Palestinians who were suspected of collaborating with Israel. He spent more than 2 decades in an Israeli prison. Sinwar later said that he had spent those years studying the enemy. He even learned how to speak Hebrew while he was in prison. He was released in 2011 as part of the deal that saw more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners exchange for Gilad Shalit, who was an IDF soldier who had been captured and taken to Gaza, where he was held for more than 5 years. At that time, Sinwar called the exchange one of the big strategic monuments in the history of our cause. Back in Gaza, Sinwar has risen through the ranks and quickly became a key player within Hamas. Sinwar became known for his brutality and the kind of violence that he inflicted on anyone who he suspected of betrayal or collaborating with the enemy. It is well known that while Sinwar was in prison, he tortured people, mostly members of Hamas. He used a hot plate to cause burns to his victims. His role in the Majd really tells you a lot about his character and his cruelty. But at the same time, some Israelis who've met him and who've worked with him say that he can also be a very practical person, openly discussing options with Israel. As the political leader of Hamas, Sinwar has focused on the group's foreign relationships. According to some experts, he was responsible for restoring Hamas's relationship with Egyptian leaders. They were wary of Hamas's support for political Islam, some of which was rubbing off in Egypt with support for the Muslim Brotherhood, and also for pulling in continued military funding from Iran. Now, this kind of a delicate balancing act between two regional Arab powers has been credited to Sinwar's political deftness. Sinwar was considered a vital decision maker and likely the main point of contact in Gaza during the intense negotiations over the last few weeks, which led to the return of more than 240 hostages taken into custody by Hamas on the 7th of October. Those talks involved senior figures from Israel, Hamas, the United States, Qatar, and Egypt. At the end of the day, there are two people at the top of the negotiations of Hamas, according to Gershon Baskin, who's a well-known Israeli peace activist. One is Yahya Sinwar on the Hamas side, and the other is Benjamin Netanyahu on the Israeli side. More than 100 Israeli and foreign hostages were released by Hamas among the 240 who were kidnapped on the 7th of October. In exchange, more than 200 Palestinian prisoners and detainees were released by Israel as part of this truce. But then that truce was short-lived. It barely lasted a week. The temporary ceasefire then collapsed on the 1st of December. Both Israel and Hamas have blamed each other for the failure of that pause. Sinwar has been called many things over the past 2 months. Israeli military spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht called Sinwar the face of evil. He even declared Sinwar to be a dead man walking. Israeli media has compared Sinwar to Osama bin Laden, while a profile published by the IDF nicknamed him the Butcher from Khan Yunis. Despite his position in the spotlight, Sinwar is just one of many commanders who Israel needs to remove before it can say that it has fully destroyed Hamas. Now, to put it simply, if Israel were to kill Sinwar, it doesn't necessarily mean that that would be the end of Hamas. But Hamas can still be toppled down even if Sinwar were to stay alive. And that is because Hamas is not a hierarchical organization. In order for Israel to claim that it has destroyed Hamas, it needs to destroy a critical mass of power centers. And in Hamas, as you very well know, there's not just one power center in Sinwar, there are multiple.